I'm Gilda Bruckman from New Words, and I want to welcome you all here. Gilda! Out celebration for Leslie Feinberg's new book, Transgender Warriors, From Joan of Arc to RuPaul. We're really happy to welcome you to New Words, and I know how happy you must be to be here because tickets for this were gone like that. You are the devoted and lucky few. Before we begin, I just want to remind you that June is Lesbian and Gay Book Month at New Words, Lesbian, Gay, Bisexual, and Transgender Book Month. On June 4th, which is Tuesday, Marjorie Garber, who is the author of Vested Interests and Vice Versa, will be speaking at 6 p.m. And there'll be other events during the month, too, so check the calendar listings. We're thrilled to have Leslie here at the start of her book tour for Transgender Warriors. This is an amazing history, lovingly restored and beautifully presented. Leslie will be signing books after the reading, and a percentage of the sales will go directly to Leslie to help with her medical expenses. Now I want to introduce Minnie Bruce Pratt. Minnie Bruce is a poet, an activist, a writer. She's the author of S/HE, We Say We Love Each Other, Rebellion, Essays 1980 to 1991, and Crime Against Nature, which won the 1989 Lamont Poetry Selection of the American Academy of Poets. Leslie is a writer who has been an inspiration to thousands of us, but she's not just our inspiration, she's Leslie's inspiration also. She's Leslie's partner, and she's going to introduce Leslie.
Wow. Thank you.
Doesn't say
Oh, it says reserved. Well, it's a joy to introduce Leslie. Leslie is my beloved, my lesbian husband, my heart's desire. And it's also a great honor to introduce Leslie because of her integrity, her passion, her commitment to social change, let me say the word, to revolution. Some of you are here because you know her through Stone Butch Blues, which is already a classic in the tradition of the Well of Loneliness, but with a lot more politics and hope. Some of you may know her because in 1974 she lived in Boston for a while and worked on the famous and infamous anti-racist campaign that drove racism back into the dens and that it came from in this city. Some of you may know her from her tour about 10 years later, which also meant a stop in Boston. One of the very earliest educational and speaking campaigns about the then emerging crisis politically and medically around AIDS. Some of you may have been, about 3 years ago, to a slideshow that she did here in Boston, in which she showed some of the pictures that are in Transgender Warriors. A slideshow that was the seed of the book, Transgender Warriors. The book that we're here to celebrate tonight. It is a brilliant book, a book of narrative, history, and political theory combined by a writer who has the soul of a poet. It's a book in which the writer's gaze is as intense as a laser burning through layers of misinformation and deliberately pervade prejudice so that we can take a fresh look at sex, gender, and the structures of class in this world. This book gives us a chance to share in Leslie's revolutionary optimism. I love Leslie, and I think you love Leslie also, But I think one of the reasons, the sort of foundation reason for that love often isn't acknowledged. And I think that foundation reason is that Leslie offers us hope and revolutionary optimism. I travel around the country a lot, and I know that in the sort of down-to-earth layers, people aren't apathetic. They are living the heritage of the great liberation movements of this century in their daily lives. I talk to people and they say to me, oh, my neighbor used racist language the other day, and I just can't stand that. And I told them, I don't want to hear that around, I don't want to hear that. Don't use that kind of language around me. I don't want that kind of stuff around me. And these are not people who are self-consciously part of social change, but they're living it. They're living those movements that have brought us all forward in this century. And they're talking about revolution. They're looking at what's going on in this country, and they're saying things are wrong. This is not how we want to be relating to each other. This is not how we want to be living. Something's got to change. The economic situation is dire. And they're talking to me about past revolutions. They're saying, well, remember in the French Revolution? Remember when, remember what was going on in South Africa? But they've had no overt leadership and no focus. Well, Leslie has a vision in Transgender Warriors about how to proceed, and that vision is informed by her revolutionary optimism and by her belief in we the people in a way that the framers of the Constitution never thought would happen. Transgender Warriors, in Transgender Warriors, Leslie offers us a guide for how we the people can draw closer together, not in the future, but right now in the here and now. Leslie Feinberg.
I'm sorry that because of illness, I can't stand. And I'm going to talk as loudly as I can. Can you hear me in the back? I'm going to do my best. I will. The minute this reading is over, I'll go sit at the front desk where I can sit and also be able to see your faces, and you can see mine. And Minnie Bruce Pratt will also be signing books out there too, so you don't have to compete for two different ends of the store. But I am filled with gratitude to be just strong enough tonight to be here with all of you. And I thank you for coming and bringing me your energy, because boy, do I need it. I feel very grateful to be at New Words, which is a safe, liberated spot to be in a dangerous world, that the people who work long, hard hours here, not just as booksellers, but community builders, have kept for us now for over 2 decades. I wasn't here when the store was subterranean, but Minnie Bruce said tonight that she should have a T-shirt that says, I read in the basement. That's how long back these associations go. I'm very grateful for New Words and for the struggle of independent booksellers who are part of the movements for change, who are holding on, with Borders and Barnes & Noble and B. Dalton's opening across the streets and competing and able to get cheaper lots of books and try to directly compete. It's very hard to hold on as booksellers, and in doing so, they're really holding on to the pieces of the movement where people know they can come after work and open the store and find a place where they can breathe a sigh of relief and find community. And so it feels safe and wonderful for me to be here. And from being so sick, it's hard to feel safe walking through the world in general, but when you're not feeling well or you're dealing with disability, it's a wonderful thing to just open a door and be comfortable somewhere. I want to thank a couple other people I'm so glad are here. I'm so glad Ellie Bolkin is here, who has read Transgender Warriors in many, many versions and many forms and offered a lot of great feedback that I think she'll see her input reflected on many pages of the book. I'm glad you're here too, Anna. I want to thank Ellie and Gail Leondar Wright. They deserve thanks for a lot of reasons, but as I'll explain more, both of them, out of both friendship and caring and political conviction, have really helped Minnie Bruce and I to set up a health fund at a time when I just could not proceed with getting tests and treatment medicines that I needed because we were just flat broke from a catastrophic illness. And I want to thank, and I'm so glad that C is here, and that is Craig Hickman, my love. If you have not read Craig Hickman's work, oh, do you have a treat in store for you? You got to run, not walk, to get this work. Craig last night did the introduction at the Arlington Street Church for the rally last night for the book, and those beautiful words are just etched in my heart, and you're going to have to wait for Gay Community News to come out to read them. But when everyone asks me, well, what was your favorite review of Transgender Warriors? I already know. I already know, and I'm so glad you're here, and that we're all here together. Look, we've made a space where we can all be here, not tolerating each other's difference, enjoying it, enriched by it. And my honey, Minnie Bruce Pratt, I am so grateful. On a personal note, Minnie Bruce Pratt is the person that I would most like to be deserted on a desert island with. And I would arrange that shipwreck myself. Only Minnie Bruce could make a day with grave illness fun. And I don't know how I would have gotten through this illness or be getting through it without her. But I just want to tell you a story because I don't want each reading to be the same because otherwise, you know, you won't feel my passion with you. You know, I don't want anything to be canned or staged because this is real living interaction between us. You came because your hearts and minds were open on this subject, and that matters to me. And I'm here sick because I wanted to be here with you. I care so much about this book. I want to be there to put it in your hands. But I want to tell you how I met Minnie Bruce Pratt. It's not a story I tell often, and for those of you who are not romantics, I will try to wrap this up quickly, but about 4 years ago, I was traveling to different branches of Workers' World Party, which, you know, I've spent my whole adult life helping to build. There's a lot of me in that party and a lot of that party in me. And I was traveling around the country to the different branches showing the slideshow, as Minnie Bruce said, that emerged to be this book today. And there was this person in this huge auditorium, you know, with these layers of seats. There was this person way up in the back in the corner. It was very badly lit. But one of the things that I noticed about this person is not what she looked like, but the kind of energy or spirit. I hesitate to use the word spirit because it's only given a metaphoric, a sort of removed from body and experience sort of interpretation. And this was very much different. This was the energy of someone who is actively in the process of understanding and listening, and she was interacting in a way as I was reading, and I thought, who is this person? What a remarkable human being. And so I was sort of reading, craned like this to this person in the back row, and so I did this slideshow, the lights went off, you know, and when I got done, I looked up, and that spot was empty. And I thought, well, maybe she didn't like my politics, or maybe I was too long-winded. You know, that can happen, you know. So I thought, well, damn, you know, And so afterwards, about 50 people came out from the audience for Ethiopian food with me, and I walked along the table saying, does anybody know who that woman in the back row was? And people would say, well, what did she look like? And I thought, well, that's a hard question to answer. It was the way she was, her mind and what she was thinking and what she experienced, and which, is not an easy way for people to recognize who you mean, And then I talked to someone, and she just smiled because she must have seen the crick in my neck as I was reading. And she said, well, that was Minnie Bruce Pratt. Now, I knew her name. I knew she was a Southern writer. I knew she was a femme, a lesbian. And I had 2 of her books at home, Crime Against Nature and Rebellion. But I had been in the middle of writing Stone Butch Blues. I was working third shift doing data entry on hypertensive studies for 25 cents a form. And I was not in the mood to read, but I had them there, And so I said to this person, well, I'll give you a quarter for a phone number. And she said it would be unprincipled for me to take it because it's listed. So that's ethical, So the next morning I called and I got Minnie Bruce's machine, and I just tried to convey what it means or meant at that time to be so marginalized socially in such a big chunk of my life. And suddenly, in an audience full of strangers, have someone be able to respond with what is clearly understanding, and I mean that on an empathetic level, not a sympathetic one. But I didn't leave my phone number because it was not meant to be a come-on call. It was what I wanted to tell this person in the audience. And so about 2 weeks later, one of the organizers of the meeting called me up and said, what did you do? And I said, well, what do you mean? What's the question? And she said, well, I don't know, but Minnie Bruce Pratt's left a message on my machine asking for your address. And she sent me a letter, and she asked me, she said, gave me a lot of feedback, and she said, I have more questions about the connections between economic systems and transgender oppression. That was the first thing that Minnie Bruce... Well, I had already devoured her books. I went right home and got those books out. Where is that book? Oh, here it is, And by the time I had begun to read her work, I already knew that it was inescapable to fall in love with her because, sometimes you read people's work and you can see their hearts and you're glad you did because you don't want to get near them. You would not want to have a cup of coffee with this person, even if they're a very good writer, whatever that means. But then there's some people whose hearts show, and all their conviction, all their beliefs and their determination in the need to change, their willingness to be part of the struggle for change is right there, and you can just see. I could just see what a remarkable human being Minnie Bruce Pratt was, besides being such an eloquent writer. And so I wrote back to her, and then she wrote back to me, and back and forth. And that's how we began courting in this sort of old-fashioned way. One of my friends in Buffalo, as I got one of these long letters from Minnie Bruce, and I had written this long one back, and she said, I don't know about writers. I mean, this is how you're courting, Whoa, slow, too, with snail. But when I finished this book, Transgender Warriors, and I was on my way to the FedEx to send it to Beacon Press, I handed it to Minnie Bruce, and I said, does this answer the question you asked me? And she said, yes, thank you. And so in many ways, this book has been a dialogue, too, or helped develop as a dialogue with Minnie Bruce Pratt on our long walks. We have a wetlands near our house where there's pheasants and hawks and great blue herons through these pathways, and out of it all rises Manhattan across the river, and in all the times that we've walked and talked. And for those of you who have not read C, S/HE, Minnie Bruce's newest book, jog out to the counter after the reading and get it. And if you have read her work, well, you know exactly why I just fell in love with Minnie Bruce and knew I'd be a damn fool to spend a day of my life without her. But if you haven't read her books, what a treat you have in store, because C will lead you to all of her work, and there's a lot more coming. It's great stuff. So, I want to just say a little something about being sick, because, you know, when you get sick enough, that is your reality. And it is a reality that is shaped in large part for me by being transgendered. I've never had anything, I've been very lucky, that a weekend in bed or an antibiotic or something couldn't get rid of. And that's a wonderful thing to be able to say. So there are people who are battling chronic illness and disability who I have deepening respect for every day as I'm struggling to get up and get around. But health is something that is hard not to take for granted when you have it, because you have to lose it to know what you had. And around late November, early December, I suddenly began to get these spiking fevers. I'd never had fevers before. I couldn't keep it under 103 or 104. Even when I was packed in ice, I couldn't swallow. I didn't know what was wrong. And Minnie Bruce was out of town, and I went to a clinic, which was something I could afford because it was only like $75 to go instead of $200 or $300. And they said, well, it's not strep throat, but we'll call it strep because, you know, you can't afford to have the test done, and take this antibiotic, and by the way, you have a urinary tract infection. I thought, well, that's the least of my problems. You know, I can't swallow. I can't take in liquids, you know. Well, the long and short of it is the fevers lasted for 4 months. And the urinary tract infection turned out to take 20 antibiotic courses of treatment, including 3 of them intravenous. And when I got rid of the urinary tract infection, they looked at my white blood count and they said, oh, something must be wrong with the lab results. This couldn't be. You have a white blood count that's like someone who's critically ill with AIDS, and you don't have AIDS. Now, I always stop here because it's impossible to say that you're HIV negative or that you don't have AIDS in this political climate without me re-expressing my solidarity to women and men who do have AIDS for their battle. So we had a really low point. It was a tough night when the doctor's office called us in and said, we won't know for another day or two if you have enough immunity to be able to resist anything. Go home, don't handle money, don't talk on public phones, don't get in the elevator with other people, don't ride home on the subway. And Minnie Bruce and I drove home, we took a cab home and hoped that the cab driver didn't have anything, wasn't going to cough and sneeze, you know, and which is, by the way, tonight why I'm not hugging people. I'm giving you my warmest handshake, but I'm not contagious, but I am very vulnerable still. So we went home, and we had already been wiped out financially from the last few months. I mean, you know, at first the antibiotics were cheap, and then they were like $13 a pill, and it's take 4 of these 3 times a day for 30 days and call me back, you know, and tell me how you're feeling. And we went home, and Minnie Bruce said, well, what are we going to do? I mean, it's Wednesday, and the rent is due on Sunday, and we're just broke, and what if you can't work and leave the house, and what are we going to do? It was a hard point, and I said, you know, well, let's get the blood work back first. We'll deal with it one day at a time. We've been dealing with it. We'll get through it. And that's the point at which Gail Leondar Wright had put out an appeal over the internet for funds, for a health fund. And I got the word back from my doctor that I could travel because I had enough other cells to make up, I don't know, 500 cells per liter of blood or something like that, and I could go out. But I said, well, can I go to Denver this week? I have to do a speaking engagement, and I only have a few, and it's going to have to see me through the rest of the year for money. And he said, well, I mean, technically you could go, but it's a mile up, and why would you want to travel when you're so sick? And I said, well, first of all, money, you know, and he said, oh, yeah, right. You know, I mean, he was caring, but it's not something affecting him every moment of the day. And it's like, well, why would you want to travel when you're sick? Don't you want to go home into bed? And I thought, well, yeah, but I can't, you know. And I also told him, and it's Denver, and there's all these important struggles going on there right now. And, you know, if I was going to go somewhere, I want to be there, you know. So I went, and the students and faculty had read Gail's appeal on the internet. And that day, they raised $1,600 for my health care. And I came back to Minnie Bruce with this stack of bills, and I said, look, honey, it's the rent. And we can pay it in cash, you know. So it has been a hard time. I am now, you know, when they found my blood count so low, they went looking for the megavirus that could have so made my system plummet like that, my immune system. And they found acute cytomegalovirus, or CMV, which is what I had had in my esophagus at the beginning. And one of the reasons it was misdiagnosed is because I couldn't afford a test, you know. And once they give you the antibiotic, it's too late to know what you had. But the other reason is because 70% of people in the population come into contact with CMV and never know it and don't get sick. But 90% of people with AIDS have a very acute form. It causes blindness and encephalitis of the brain. And I have that very acute form, although I'm HIV negative. And boy, it sure has affected my vision, I must say, although I don't have retinitis specifically. And so then they had to ask themselves, well, why do you have this so acutely and so chronically? And that's the question that they have yet to answer. And that's a lot of stress for Minnie Bruce and I, not to know the final diagnosis, but we're dealing with it just like we're you know, a day at a time, and enjoying our life, you know, as best we can as we get through it. But I would say that this overall struggle for my health, for me, has been deeply impacted by two major realities, because we live in an economic, social, and political reality in which everything is rooted, including our health or our lack of it. The first is that Minnie Bruce and I have been billed for about $20,000 worth of health care in the last 5 months. We're going into month 6. When they decided last week to treat me aggressively for the cytomegalovirus because I was getting worse, not better, after 5 months, they said, well, you need a month of ganciclovir, and it'll be about $12,000. Well, I don't have $12,000, but my doctor already knows that now. He's being very conscious and very caring. And he said, well, we could give you half pills and half IV. That would make it cheaper. We could get it through the People with AIDS network, and that would make it cheaper. And I'll give you the office discount, and that would be cheaper. So it brought it down to about $4,500 for a month's worth of medicine, which if you can't afford, well, this is capitalism. You just can't get it, you know. Health care is not a right in this country yet. It's still a privilege for those who can afford it. When the medicine arrived for me to travel, you know, the doctor gave me these little balls. I said, what are these? He said, well, they're self-pumping, contained balls. It means that instead of being tethered to a bag for 6 hours a day watching TV, you know, that you can just hook it up and slip it in your pocket and walk around and, you know, function. I said, this is great. Why didn't I have this before? He said, because they cost twice as much as the ones in the bag. And I said, how am I paying for this? And he said, well, I billed this to the office so you could make this trip, and we'll deal with it when you get back. That's the kind of caring community, this infectious disease specialist community that's come out of the AIDS epidemic. And the fact that bigotry has stood in the way of health care as well as economics. I was hospitalized. When the bills started to go up, I called Medicaid. I called for the Medicaid listing in New Jersey. And they said, we don't have a Medicaid listing. I said, well, give me, I don't know, a government agency in New Jersey. I called up, I said, I can't find the listing for Medicaid. They said, oh, we don't have Medicaid in New Jersey anymore. See, while they're trying to divert us with scapegoating, you know, anti-immigrant, all this bashing that's going on, well, they took away Medicaid in New Jersey. So I said, well, what am I going to do? I need some kind of assistance. They said, well, if you can prove that you can never work again for the rest of your life, and that you haven't earned $1 in the last year, there may be some form of assistance. I said, if I hadn't earned $1 in the last year, I'd be living on the streets, and you'd tell me I need an address in order to get benefits, you know? The other thing is that, like 40 million documented workers in this country, and I don't know how many millions of undocumented workers, I didn't have health insurance. You know, I didn't have $200 a month in order to gamble that I might get sick someday. I have health insurance as of May 1st, but everything is a pre-existing illness. This is just insurance because clearly when you get this sick for this long, you better have insurance for the years to come, because just getting back on my feet or getting over it isn't like right in the cards yet, and I may need more health care. But economics has not been the only factor. Bigotry has been another. I'll just give you two examples. Is that one night I was warned if I got a spiking fever again with the medication I was on to go immediately to an emergency room. And when my fever began to rise, Minnie Bruce and I went to an emergency room in Jersey City, and the doctor treated me very seriously at first when he thought that I was male at a quick glance. And then when he discovered that I was transgendered, he said, "Why did you come here? Go home. Don't come back here." I said, "I came here because I have a fever. Why is my fever so high?" He said, "Because you're a very troubled person who worries too much." So through the Lesbian and Gay Anti-Violence Project, Whitney Brown in particular as an attorney, I challenged, I paid for every test that was done there, which is labor that I value, and I refused to pay the doctor's bill. And St. Francis Hospital in Jersey City has just agreed to waive the bill. And, you know, when there was a struggle, I mean, you're supposed to be embarrassed and ashamed and shut up and go home, and, you know, they didn't expect it to be an issue. About 4 days later, I had to be hospitalized in New York City at Cabrini Hospital, where I was placed on, they have female wards and they have male wards. Now, I think it would make a lot more sense to have wards, for example, with heart patients who need minute-by-minute care, and then those people who just need meds a couple of times a day and checking in on, you know, but that's me. The hatred that was aimed at me by some of the healthcare personnel was so severe that I just was getting sicker and upset all the time, afraid to sleep literally, and I finally said to my doctor, "I'm leaving after 72 hours mid-treatment. I can't take this." He had walked in on the middle of a kind of, you know, get this Martian off the floor, but no other floor will take this person, you know, furor in the hall. And that's why he's made it possible for me to have IVs at home now or in his office. But even having to have IVs in that circumstance is like having to be in a closet. I mean, I appreciate what he's doing for me. His office is full of people like myself who don't have the money or who aren't welcome in a hospital for whom he's providing care. But how come we gotta be in somebody's office on a Sunday morning doing this? You know, why can't we be getting health care that's round the clock and that's intensive that we need to get well? I'm also challenging the treatment from Cabrini. I'm furious because Cabrini didn't mind taking the money, for example, of transsexuals when they ran a sex reassignment clinic out of the hospital. But they could treat someone in such a dehumanizing manner and then charge me for it? I've asked Whitney Brown and the Lesbian Gay Anti-Violence Project to press this as a bias case. Now, there's no laws against discriminating against a transgendered or transsexual or drag or intersexual person in this country, not on a federal or state or local level. But the struggle has won laws in New York City against anti-woman and anti-lesbian and gay bias. And so I figure, well, I got to fit in at least a couple of those categories. I'm going to press that. And when the time comes that the suit is really underway, I'm going to call upon all of you to not make the healthcare apparatus at Cabrini unwieldy, but to make billing and complaint departments at that hospital just overwhelmed. There will be no business as usual until they begin issuing directives saying, you better treat everybody with respect who comes in here sick or well. I have to say I have been living my war. You know, each one of us are involved in our own struggle, our own battles for dignity, for employment, for health care. But being this seriously ill at a time when so many of my brothers, sisters too, but so many of my brothers I spend all day with on IVs or in labs or whatever who are dealing with AIDS, that I just feel a deeper respect for the courage of people who are up against AIDS and bigotry and economic barriers. Whatever energy I have, I'll be there in the struggle to force this government to deal with this public health emergency in a responsible way, to provide not only what's necessary for a cure, but for treatment and for care for people, so that nobody has to come up with $12,000 for a month worth of antibiotic. So I say that because with what energy I have tonight, I'm really glad you're here. I came here because this book means so much to me that I want to be part of giving it to you. And now, thank goodness, it exists outside of me so that no matter what happens, I can say, here, this is what my life's been about, trying to articulate, this is what I meant. And I am stunned to be at a point in my life where I may not have the strength to be able to put it in many more hands. I expected to be able to just go out and meet with people all over the country who I wanted to reach with this book and this message. And it's just almost unimaginable to me that I can't just tell my body, well, come on, let's do it, you know, just get on that plane. But I packed for this trip, my first experiment traveling sick, and Minnie Bruce said, now, I'm not trying to matronize you or anything, but I'd like to go over a checklist with you. Did you bring your reflux caps? Did you bring your medications? Did you bring your pills? Did you bring the following? And I said, yes, yes, yes. So we got to the airport at Bradley and waiting around for the person to pick us up and running back and forth trying to page them, and we were tired and I was wrecked, and finally they came and I walked away from my garment bag. An hour later in Northampton, I said, oh gosh, you know, we got them. I said, Minnie Bruce, it's my suits and my clothes for the week. What am I going to do? And we called and they said, we'll send it to the Boston airport, and people offered to drive Minnie Bruce to the airport and pick it up. I said, oh, phew, thank goodness. So she walks into the place where we're staying holding the garment bag, and I said, oh, you found it, great. I was so worried I can't afford to replace those clothes. And she looked really upset, and I said, what's wrong, honey? And she said, sit down. I said, what? You know, because all the surprises these last few months have not been good ones, you know. And she said, well, you know the checklist I went over with you? And I said, yeah. She said, there's no suits in this garment bag. She said, you forgot to pack your clothes. She said, it's just a couple of shirts. And she said, I'm just beginning to realize how sick you are. You know, and sometimes this is how we realize it. Not all the meds and all the tests and all the dramatic signs, but the little signs. Because I assure you, I have been packing for myself and dressing for a lot of years now, and I've never done that before. So the point of this is that I just felt desperate that night. We went to Legal Seafood, and over a cup of chowder said, you know, what am I going to do? This book means everything to me, and I really need to take it out to people and hand it to them and say, read this. I really want to open up this discussion. It's about our lives. It's about your lives too. You know that. That's why you're here. You know that my right to be me and your right to be you are interconnected. And I got to a point of a certain kind of acceptance in the last couple days of being ready to turn it over, to be able to say to you that I have this strength to get to you and hand the book to you. And I want you to read it, and I want you to think about it. And if it speaks to you and to your life and to your identity, and if you feel the connections in your own life with what you read here, and if it resonates as truth to you, then I would ask you to use your energy and your strength to take this message out to other people who need it, for me and as part of our struggle together, because this isn't about being an author or being a reader. We know that. This is about a struggle to inform each other, to understand about each other's battles so that we can be the best fighters against each other's oppression. And so this book is my gift to you. If I had my way, it would be a free book. It wouldn't help New Words stay open. It wouldn't help Beacon keep publishing. But I know that New Words would like to be able to just distribute books to who needs them too. But in many ways, I feel like this is the gift of my life to you. And it's the best way I could possibly convey it. And it includes 115 photos and graphics and images. It's not just history. And for those who get scared when they hear history, because, you know, we know what year the Magna Carta was signed, but we don't know what the Magna Carta was about, and we didn't do well in history, and we couldn't find ourselves in those pages. This isn't that kind of history. This is the kind of history that you'll find yourself in. I have a great deal of faith in each of you and in all of us to be able to carry out a struggle. No one of us does it alone. And so I had to remember that, and remember my faith and my trust that we're all in this together, and that this book, if it does resonate as truth for you, will pass overhead on hands to the people who need it. And that's why it means a great deal to me that each of you came tonight to share this celebration, not only of my life, but of yours too as warriors. So I'm just going to read from the preface, and then Minnie, Bruce, and I will get a head start and get out to the front desk and get to meet you quickly. And forgive me, my eyes are so bad with this illness. I'm going to struggle through it. But if I stumble over it, it doesn't mean the words aren't filled with passion for me. Are you a guy or a girl? I've heard the question all my life. The answer is not so simple, since there are no pronouns in the English language as complex as I am, and I do not want to simplify myself in order to neatly fit one or the other. There are millions more like me in the United States alone. We have a history filled with militant heroes/heroines, yet therein lies the rub. How can I tell you about their battles when the words woman and man, feminine and masculine, are almost the only words that exist in the English language to describe all the vicissitudes of bodies and styles of expression? Living struggles accelerate changes in language. I heard language evolve during the 1960s when I came out into the drag bars of Western New York and Southern Ontario. At that time, the only words used to describe us cut and seared, yelled at us from the window of a screeching car filled with potential bashers. There were no words that we'd go out of our way to use that made us feel good about ourselves. When we all first heard the word gay, some of my friends vehemently opposed the word on the grounds that it made us sound happy. No one will ever use gay, my friends assured me, each offering an alternative word, none of which took root. I learned that language can't be ordered individually as if from a Sears catalog. It is forged collectively in the fiery heat of struggle. Right now, much of the sensitive language that was won by the liberation movements of the 60s and 70s in the United States is bearing the brunt of a right-wing backlash against being politically correct. Where I come from, being politically correct means using language that respects other people's oppressions and wounds, and this chosen language needs to be defended. The words I use in this book may become outdated in a very short time because the transgender movement is still young and defining itself. But while the slogans lettered on the banners may change quickly, the struggle will rage on. Since I'm writing this book as a contribution to the demand for transgender liberation, the language I'm using in this book is not aimed at defining, but at defending the diverse communities that are coalescing. I don't have a personal stake in whether the trans liberation movement results in a new third pronoun or gender-neutral pronouns, like the ones such as Z, he/she, and here, his/her, being experimented with in cyberspace. It's not the words in and of themselves that are important to me. It's our lives. The struggle of trans people over the centuries is not his story or her story. It is our story. I've been called a he/she, butch, bulldagger, cross-dresser, passing woman, female-to-male transvestite, and drag king. The word I prefer to use to describe myself is transgender. Today, the word transgender has at least two colloquial meanings. It has been used as an umbrella term to include everyone who challenges the boundaries of sex and gender. It is also used to draw a distinction between those who reassign the sex they were labeled at birth and those of us whose gender expression is considered inappropriate for our sex. Presently, many organizations, from Transgender Nation in San Francisco to Monmouth Ocean Transgender on the Jersey Shore, use this term inclusively. I asked many self-identified transgender activists who are named or pictured in this book who they believed were included under the umbrella term. Those polled named the following: transsexuals, transgenders, transvestites, transgenderists, bigenders, drag queens, drag kings, cross-dressers, masculine women, feminine men, intersexuals, people referred to in the past as hermaphrodites, androgynes, cross-genders, shapeshifters, passing women, passing men, gender benders, gender blenders, bearded women, and women bodybuilders who have crossed the line of what is considered socially acceptable for a female body. But the word transgender is increasingly also being used in this more specific way as well. The term transgenderist was first introduced into the English language by trans warrior Virginia Prince. Virginia told me, quote, "I coined the noun transgenderist in 1987 or 88. There had to be some name for people like myself who trans the gender barrier, meaning somebody who lives full-time in the gender opposite their anatomy. I have not transed the sex barrier," unquote. As the overall transgender movement has developed, more people are exploring this distinction between a person's sex, female, intersexual, male, and their gender expression, feminine, androgynous, masculine, and other variations. Many national and local gender magazines and community groups are therefore starting to use TS/TG, transsexual and transgender. Under Western law, doctors glance at the genitals of an infant and pronounce the baby female or male, and that's that. Transsexual men and women traverse the boundary of the sex they were assigned at birth. And in dominant Western cultures, the gender expression of babies is assumed at birth. Pink for girls, blue for boys. Girls are expected to grow up feminine, boys masculine. Transgender people traverse, bridge, or blur the boundary of the gender expression they were assigned at birth. However, not all transsexuals choose surgery and hormones. Some transgender people do. I am transgender, and I have shaped myself surgically and hormonally twice in my life, and I reserve my right to do it again. But while our movement has introduced some new terminology, all the words used to refer to our communities still suffer from limitations. For example, terms like cross-dress, cross-gender, male to female, and female to male reinforce the idea that there are only two distinct ways to be. You're either one or the other, and that's just not true. For example, bigender means people who have both a feminine and a masculine side. In the past, most bigendered individuals were lumped together under the category of cross-dressers. However, some people live their whole lives cross-dressed. Others are referred to as part-time cross-dressers. Perhaps if gender oppression didn't exist, some of those part-timers would enjoy the freedom to cross-dress all the time. But bigendered people want to be able to express both facets of who they are. Although I defend any person's right to use transvestite as a self-definition, I use the term sparingly in this book. Although some trans publications and organizations still use transvestite or the abbreviation TV in their titles, many people who are labeled transvestites have rejected the term because it invokes concepts of psychological pathology, sexual fetishism, and obsession, when there's really nothing at all unhealthy about this form of self-expression. And the medical and psychiatric industries have always defined transvestites as males, but there are many female cross-dressers as well. The words cross-dresser, transvestite, and drag convey the sense that these intricate expressions of self revolve solely around clothing. This creates the impression that if you're so oppressed because of what you're wearing, you can just change your outfit. But anyone who saw La Cage aux Folles, the original, remembers that the drag queen never seemed more feminine than when she was crammed into a three-piece man's suit and taught to butter bread like a real man. Because it is our entire spirit, the essence of who we are, that doesn't conform to narrow gender stereotypes, many people who in the past have been referred to as cross-dressers, transvestites, drag queens, and drag kings today define themselves as transgender. Altogether, our many communities challenge all sex and gender borders and restrictions. The glue that cements these diverse communities together is the defense of the right of each individual to define themselves. As I write this book, the word trans is being used increasingly by the gender community as a term uniting the entire coalition. If the term had already enjoyed popular recognition, I would have titled this book Trans Warriors. But since the word transgender is still most recognizable to people all over the world, I use it in its most inclusive sense, to refer to all courageous trans warriors of every sex and gender, those who led battles and rebellions throughout history, and those who today muster the courage to battle for their identities and for their very lives. Transgender Warriors is not an exhaustive trans history, or even the history of the rise and development of the modern trans movement. Instead, it is a fresh look at sex and gender in history and the interrelationships of class, nationality, race, and sexuality. Have all societies recognized only two sexes? Have people who traverse the boundaries of sex and gender always been so demonized? Why is sex reassignment or cross-dressing a matter of law? But how could I find the answers to these questions when it means wending my way through diverse societies in which the concepts of sex and gender shift like sand dunes over the ages? And as a white transgender researcher, how can I avoid foisting my own interpretations on the cultures of oppressed peoples' nationalities? I tried to tackle this problem in several ways. First, I focused a great deal of attention on Western Europe, not out of unexamined Eurocentrism, but because I hold the powers that ruled there for centuries responsible for campaigns of hatred and bigotry that are today woven into the fabric of Western cultures and have been imposed upon colonized peoples all over the world. Setting the blame for these attitudes squarely on the shoulders of the European ruling classes is part of my contribution to the anti-imperialist movements. I've also included photos from cultures all over the world, and I've sought out people from those countries and nationalities to help me create short, factual captions. I tried very hard not to interpret or compare these different cultural expressions. These photographs are not meant to imply that the individuals pictured identify themselves as transgender in the modern Western sense of the word. Instead, I've presented their images as a challenge to the currently accepted Western dominant view that woman and man are all that exist and that there is only one way to be a woman or a man. I don't take a view that an individual's gender expression is exclusively a product of either biology or culture. For example, if gender is solely biologically determined, why do rural women tend to be more masculine than urban women? On the other hand, if gender expression is simply something we are taught, why has such a huge trans segment of the population not learned it? If two sexes are an immutable biological fact, why have so many societies recognized more than two? Yet while biology is not destiny, there are some biological markers on the human anatomical spectrum. So is sex a social construct? Or is the rigid categorization of sexes the cultural component? Clearly, there must be a complex interaction between individuals and their societies. My interest in this subject is not merely theoretical. You probably already know that those of us who cross the cultural boundaries of sex and gender are paying a terrible price. We face discrimination and physical violence. We're denied the right to live and work in dignity and respect. It takes so much courage to live our lives that sometimes just leaving our homes in the morning and facing the world as who we really are is in and of itself an act of resistance. But perhaps you didn't know that we have a history of fighting against such injustice, and that today we're forging a movement for liberation. Since I couldn't include photos of all the hard-working leading activists who make up our movement, I've included a collection of photos that begins to illustrate the depth and breadth of sex and gender identities, balanced by race, nationality, and region. No one book could include all the sundry identities of trans individuals and organizations which range from the Short Mountain Fairies from Tennessee to the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence in San Francisco. It is time for us to write as experts on our own histories. For too long, our light has been refracted through other people's prisms. My goal in this book is to fashion history, politics, and theory into a steely weapon with which to defend a very oppressed segment of the population. I grew up thinking that the hatred I faced because of my gender expression was simply a byproduct of human nature, and that it must be my fault that I was a target for such outrage. I don't want any young person to ever believe that's true again. And so I wrote this book in order to lay bare the roots and tendrils of sex and gender oppression. Today, a great deal of gender theory is abstracted from human experience. But if theory is not the crystallized resin of experience, it ceases to be a guide to action. I offer history, politics, and theory that live and breathe because they are rooted in the experiences of real people who fought flesh and blood battles for freedom. And my work is not solely devoted to chronicling the past, but is a component of my organizing to help shape the future. Transgender Warriors is the heart of my life's work. When I clenched my fists and shouted back at slurs aimed to strip me of my humanity, this was the certainty behind my anger. When I sputtered in pain at well-meaning individuals who told me, "I just don't get what you are," this is what I meant. Today, Transgender Warriors is my answer. This is the core of my pride. Thank you.
Leslie has given us the gift of her pride, her words, her heart, and her strength. We have a chance to return the gift. I want everybody to take out your wallet and see what we can do to help with her medical expense. See if we can really make Leslie's life a little easier in the coming months. I'm going to start one basket in the back and one in the front, and I'm going to start it myself. Pass it back and start it.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, this I avoided.
Jermaine Lawrence. I'll let her tell you.
You know, and
Hope you enjoy it.
Thank you very much.
Hi. What's your name?
Patty?
P-A-T-T?
P-A-T-T-I.
Okay.
Yeah.
treatment for the okay. So the first line
Thank you.
social work.
Wonderful to hear you.
Hope you enjoy it.
Thank you very much. Take care.
Bye-bye. Now it's your turn. Yeah, but it's tiring. It's a lot of work.
I'd be happy.
That'd be great.
Oh, this is such a great book. You can enjoy it.
I'm sorry.
That's all right.
Do you want?
That's all right. It's a pause. Should I sign something? It is just declining stack. Declining stack, yeah. Sorry.
There you go.
Oh, phew.
Literally.
Should we look up? Look up,
He's gonna
really
provide the words. Sit down and do it no matter what.
What are we asking? Oh.
Well,
There you go. Thank you.
You just have to walk out.
What you think?
Oh boy, how has Leslie's work affected me? That's a really tough one because it's affected almost every aspect of my life. I'm a teacher and work with kids.
Oh, good. Yeah. Yeah.
Do we start again? Oh, my name is Denise Paquin, and I'm a teacher, an elementary school teacher in Brookline, and I work with kids of all ages, well, kindergarten through 5th grade mostly. And you see gender issues all the time in my work. It's a big part of my life, but also growing up, I can relate personally to what it means to fight to just be who you are in this polarized gender world. So I met her actually in New York City when I was just coming out, and I was afraid. I didn't know if it was a man or a woman. Oh my God. And I talked to my friend. And then a few years later, I read Stone Butch Blues and knew exactly what was happening and got to really get inside who Leslie Feinberg was. And I don't see that kind of honesty in writing very often. And with Leslie's honesty about really opening her full self and being fully with a reader, I could dive into her book. And relate. So I'm anxious to read her history book.
how do you think Stone Butch Blues has affected you, the movement as a whole, or within what you've just touched yourself? Other possibilities?
I think because it's reached people at a real heart and soul level, it's been able to touch people who were once afraid and could relate, or why they were afraid. Then they focus on that, and they can say, hey, wait a minute, and come back and look at this as a real,
Talk, chat, do something?
a real, more than just, I want to say a real issue, but it's not an issue, it's a real life here we're talking about, and it's a part of many people's lives. She's like being a spider, making the web, and it seems really fragile right now, but it's spreading, and it's quite strong.
As a teacher, are you in a union?
Am I in a union? No, I'm not, actually. I'm actually in a private section. I'm in an after-school program, so it's run by a parent board, and I'm not in the public schools, although I operate in a public school. So, officially, not in a union. What is it?
Thanks.
All right. You're welcome.